My name is Kyla Barton. I'm 27 years old, a graphic designer living in Brighton. For years, I worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, and saved every penny to finally buy my own little townhouse near the sea. I thought my parents would be proud, but the night I told them, the air turned icy. My mother's face hardened, my father slammed his glass on the table, and my older brother smirked. They had already decided that the house I bought should belong to him and his family, because, in their words, he deserved it more than me. They called me selfish, accused me of betraying our family plan, and demanded I hand over the keys. I sat there, trembling, realizing that the people who were supposed to protect me were ready to steal from me. If your own parents tried to take away everything you worked for, what would you do? I didn't expect my life to turn into a battlefield that night. I walked into my parents' dining room carrying a box of pastries, still smelling of vanilla and chocolate, thinking it would be a celebration. I had been waiting for this moment for years, the chance to announce that after endless late nights and years of grinding through deadlines, I finally had something that was completely mine. The lasagna was still steaming in its tray when I sat down. The dining table was cluttered with glasses, half-burned candles, and children's crayons Daniel's kids had left scattered. My mother fussed with the plates, as always, and my father poured himself another glass of red wine already flushed. I felt my heart race as I cleared my throat. I have something to share, I said, trying to sound casual. I bought a house by the sea, it's mine. For 1 second there was silence. I imagined applause, hugs, maybe a toast. Instead, the silence thickened like fog rolling into the room. My mother dropped the serving spoon with a sharp clatter. You what? I bought a house, I repeated, smiling nervously. In Hove, a small townhouse I've been saving for years. My father's hand froze on the stem of his glass, his knuckles whitened. And you didn't consult us, I blinked. Why would I need to? I bought it myself. That was when Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking. Well, that's convenient. We were just talking about moving somewhere bigger. Sarah and the kids need more space. This works out perfectly. I frowned. What do you mean? My mother folded her arms. He means exactly what he said. That house should be for Daniel and his family. You don't need a whole house, Kyla. You're single. You barely have time to cook for yourself. Why should you keep all that space? Her words cut like glass. I felt my cheeks flush hot. Because I bought it with my money, for me. My father slammed his glass down so hard wine splashed onto the tablecloth. Don't be selfish. Think of your brother's children. They deserve a stable home. Isn't family more important than your pride? I looked from one face to another, searching for a shred of pride, a spark of congratulations, anything. But all I saw was expectation, cold, greedy, suffocating expectation. Something cracked inside me that night. I excused myself from the table before anyone could say another word. My hands were trembling as I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. My mother called after me, her voice sharp and shrill, but I didn't stop. I walked out into the cold night, the sting of the sea breeze mixing with the sting in my chest. The street was dark, lit only by the weak yellow glow of the lampposts. I stood there, gulping the salty air, trying to process what had just happened. All these years, I thought my sacrifices meant something, that if I worked hard enough, saved long enough, maybe I'd finally be seen as worthy. But tonight it was clear. No matter what I did, I would always come second to Daniel. It wasn't a new revelation. Deep down, I'd known it all along. When we were kids, Daniel was the star. He was the eldest, the golden boy. Every school play, every football match, our parents sat in the front row, cheering loud enough for the whole town to hear. When I brought home drawings, they barely glanced before tacking them onto the fridge behind his medals. When I won a scholarship to study design, they shrugged and said, "That's nice, dear," while bragging about Daniel's promotion to anyone who would listen. I used to think if I just tried harder, they'd notice me. I stayed up nights studying, worked through summers, smiled through their dismissive remarks. But their love was conditional, always weighed and measured against Daniel's needs. And now, after years of sacrifice, I thought buying my own home would finally shift something. I imagined my father patting my shoulder with pride, my mother telling me how independent I was. Instead, they wanted to take it from me before I'd even moved in. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with numb fingers. A message from my mother glared on the screen. "You don't understand how important this is for the family. Hand the keys to Daniel. We'll talk tomorrow." Another message, seconds later. "Don't make this difficult, Kyla." I shoved the phone back into my pocket, my stomach twisting. My legs carried me home on autopilot, through streets that blurred together. I dropped onto my couch and stared at the ceiling, the shadows from the street lamp slicing across the room. Was this really happening? I had worked for years to build a future for myself. And in one dinner, my family made it clear they would rather erase me from that future than let me stand on my own. I cried that night quietly, into the pillow I'd bought years ago from a thrift shop. My tears soaked the fabric, and I thought about all the little things I had denied myself: new clothes, vacations, nights out, so I could save. Every penny, every compromise had led to this house. And they wanted to rip it away as if it were nothing. As dawn began to creep through the blinds, I whispered to myself, "They're not going to take it from me." But even as I said it, fear lingered in my chest, because I knew my family. They didn't take no for an answer. The next morning, I woke up to the shrill buzz of my phone vibrating across the nightstand. My head ached from crying, my eyes swollen. I reached for it, dreading what I might see. Dozens of missed calls. A string of messages filled the screen. From Mom, "We need to talk. Daniel is counting on you." From Dad, "You've embarrassed us. Fix this." From Daniel, "Keys today, don't make me come get them." My chest tightened. I dropped the phone onto the bed as if it had burned me. I wanted to ignore them, but the buzzing didn't stop. Every few minutes, another call, another message, another reminder that my family wasn't going to let this go. I turned my phone off, tossing it into the drawer, but the silence that followed felt even heavier. By noon, the doorbell rang. Once, twice, then pounding. I froze, heart hammering, as muffled voices spilled through the door. My mother's voice, sharp and insistent. "Kyla, open this door right now. You're being ridiculous." Daniel's deeper voice cut in, mocking, "We don't have all day. Hand them over and we'll be done with this." I pressed my back against the wall, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I felt like a child again, cornered, powerless. My knees shook and I fought the urge to cry. They banged for what felt like forever, then silence. I stayed perfectly still, ears straining. Finally, the sound of their car door slamming echoed outside, followed by the fading rumble of an engine. When I was sure they were gone, I collapsed onto the floor, my hands covering my face. My body trembled as adrenaline drained out of me. How far would they go? I looked around at the boxes still stacked against the walls. My new home, my safe space, already felt tainted. I had dreamed of filling these rooms with laughter, with art, with warmth. Instead, all I could hear was their fists pounding against the wood, their voices demanding I surrender. I forced myself up and dragged the boxes into the living room. I unpacked one, then another, just to remind myself this was mine. My books lined the shelf. My mugs clinked into the cabinet. My blankets unfolded across the couch. Each item whispered, "You earned this. Don't give it away." But even as I arranged the room, the fear lingered. I couldn't shake the image of their angry faces outside my door, the certainty that this wasn't over. That night, I left the lights off, curled up in the corner of the sofa with a blanket wrapped tight. Every creak of the house, every car passing by made me flinch. I half expected them to come back, to break in, to take what was mine by force. And in that silence, a bitter truth settled in my chest. My own family had become the enemy. The following evening, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. The walls of my new home felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with memories of fists pounding on the door. I picked up the phone and called Emma, my best friend since university. She answered on the second ring. "Kyla, you sound off. What's going on?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. About the dinner, the accusations, the pounding on my door, the endless texts. There was a pause, then her voice sharpened. "That's insane. They can't just take your house. It's yours, right? The mortgage, the contract, everything's in your name?" "Yes," I whispered, "all of it, but they don't care. They think family obligations matter more than paperwork." Emma sighed. "Then you need to be careful. People like that don't stop at words. If they're already harassing you, they might try something uglier. Keep your documents safe. Double-check everything." Her words sent a shiver through me. I had all the papers neatly stacked in a folder on my desk, but suddenly that didn't feel secure enough. After we hung up, I slipped the folder into a backpack and shoved it under my bed, as if hiding it from the world would keep it safe. Later that night, I decided to tackle some unpacking, if only to distract myself. I opened a dusty cardboard box labeled miscellaneous, the kind of box you throw random things into when moving in a rush. Inside were old sketchbooks, some childhood photographs, and a stack of papers my mother had given me years ago when she cleared out the attic. At the bottom, I found a small leather-bound notebook. My mother's handwriting looped across the cover, "Household Notes, 2008. Curiosity prickled my skin. I flipped through the yellowed pages, expecting recipes or bills. Instead, I found something that made my stomach drop. There, written in neat cursive, were lines that read, "Daniel will need space when he marries. Kyla can manage with less. When the time comes, she should support him with what she has. It's only fair." I stared at the words, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a plan. A blueprint for my life, written without me, decided before I even knew what I wanted. My hands trembled as I snapped the notebook shut. My entire childhood flashed before me, the missed birthdays, the casual dismissals, the way Daniel's needs always came first. It had never been accidental. It was deliberate. I pressed the notebook to my chest and sank to the floor. Rage and grief tangled inside me, burning hotter with each breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. I sat on the floor for hours, the notebook heavy in my lap. Every word written in my mother's tidy script echoed in my skull, louder and louder until I could hardly breathe. They had mapped out my life as if I were a piece of furniture, something to be moved around for Daniel's comfort. The anger simmered, hot and corrosive, until it drowned out the fear. My family had stolen enough from me, my confidence, my childhood, my chance to feel equal. But they weren't going to steal my home, not this time. I pulled myself up, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Shadows stretched across the walls as the streetlights flickered outside, but I didn't feel small anymore. I felt restless, alive, determined. I opened my laptop and started typing. First, a list of everything I'd sacrificed over the years, then a list of every time my parents had favored Daniel. By the time I finished, the pages looked like evidence in a trial, a case file built against the people who had raised me. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but writing it down made it real. It wasn't just in my head anymore. I could see it, I could touch it, and I could fight it. My phone buzzed again, though I had silenced most notifications. One new message slipped through from Daniel. "Last chance, Kyla. Stop being dramatic. You'll hand over the keys sooner or later. Might as well do it the easy way." I stared at the glowing screen, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel scared of his threats. I felt something sharper. I whispered into the dark, "You don't know who you're dealing with anymore." The house creaked around me, as if in agreement. This wasn't just a building. It was mine, my proof, my freedom, and I would fight for it, no matter what it took. The week after that dinner was one of the longest of my life. It was as if my entire existence had been swallowed by noise. Noise from my phone, noise from my own mind, noise from the past that wouldn't stop replaying itself in cruel fragments. At first, I tried to convince myself they would calm down. Maybe my parents just needed time to process, to accept that I had done something without their input. Maybe Daniel had made his ridiculous comment about moving into my house in the heat of the moment. I told myself they couldn't really mean it. But denial doesn't last long when reality pounds on your front door. The morning after the dinner, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating endlessly against the wooden nightstand. My head was heavy, my eyes gritty from barely sleeping. I blinked into the dim light of my bedroom and reached for the phone. The screen glowed with missed calls, 22 of them, half from Mom, half from Dad, and 3 from Daniel, all stacked in the early hours of the morning. I sat up in bed, clutching the phone in both hands. The pit in my stomach grew deeper with every notification. I swiped into the messages, and there they were, lines of text staring back at me like tiny daggers. "Mom, Kyla, we need to talk about what you did. This isn't how families handle things." "Dad, you should have asked us first. You can't make decisions like this on your own." Mom again, "Daniel has children, you don't. He comes first. Always." "Daniel, drop off the keys tonight. Don't make me come get them." My mouth went dry. I dropped the phone onto the blanket and just stared at the ceiling, my chest tightening as if an invisible hand were pressing down on it. I had always known they favored Daniel, but seeing it spelled out so plainly in black and white, it made my skin crawl. I didn't reply. I couldn't. What would I even say? That I wasn't giving them the house? That they were insane? That I was tired of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family? The words felt useless before I even typed them. By noon, when the calls hadn't stopped, I shoved the phone into a drawer and slammed it shut. The silence was immediate, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hums with tension, like the pause between lightning and thunder. I tried to distract myself with errands. I went out for groceries, walking briskly down the aisles, grabbing bread, milk, and pasta as if I were on a mission. My cart rattled noisily across the floor. I kept my head down, afraid of seeing someone I knew, afraid they might already be whispering about me. My family was well known in Brighton, Daniel especially. He played football for the local club when we were younger, and people still stopped him on the street. I pushed the cart harder, my knuckles white. This was my town too, my life, my choice. When I got back to the house, I froze on the front step. There was something taped to the door. A folded piece of paper, flapping slightly in the sea breeze. I peeled it off with shaky hands. My mother's handwriting scrawled across the page, a tone both sweet and threatening. "We left lasagna in the fridge for you. Eat something. But remember, this house isn't really yours. Daniel needs it more. Don't make us go further." I stood there, my shopping bags digging into my arms, the paper fluttering against my fingers. For a moment, I thought I might be sick. Inside, the fridge door creaked open to reveal a foil-covered tray, warm condensation fogging the plastic wrap. Lasagna, my favorite when I was little. I carried it straight to the trash can and dropped it in, the clang of the pan against the metal echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot. It wasn't food. It was bait. I pressed my hands against the cool countertop, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to think. I needed to do something other than sit here and wait for them to break me down. But my mind kept spiraling back to the dinner table, to my father's hand slamming the glass, to my mother's cold dismissal, to Daniel's smirk. No matter how many times I replayed it, the ending was always the same, me walking out alone, carrying the shame of not being enough. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing Emma. My voice cracked when she answered. "Kai, what's going on?" I tried to explain, but the words came out in a flood, tripping over each other, about the dinner, the note, the lasagna, the threats. I heard myself sounding paranoid, unhinged, but Emma stayed quiet, listening. Finally, she said, her voice firm, "That's insane. They can't take your house. It's in your name, right? Mortgage, contract, everything." "Yes," I said, wiping tears from my cheek. "Everything, but they don't care. They think family obligation trumps paperwork." "Then you need backup," she said. "You need someone who will fight for you legally. You need a lawyer." I swallowed hard. The idea of dragging my family into a courtroom felt like stepping into quicksand. But wasn't I already sinking? The next day, I sat in a cramped office above the Brighton pier, a folder clutched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles turned pale. The lawyer, Helen, was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s with hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that didn't miss a thing. She spread my documents across her desk, the deed, the mortgage, the bank transfers. Her pen tapped against the paper as she read silently. I sat frozen, every second stretching into hours. Finally, she looked up. "Everything here looks clean. The property is yours, sole owner. No shared names, no loopholes. They have no legal right to it." Relief burst through me so suddenly I almost laughed. The pressure in my chest loosened just a little, but Helen's face didn't soften. "That doesn't mean they won't try something. Families can get creative when money and property are involved. Sometimes they fabricate claims, forge signatures, argue verbal agreements. It doesn't always work, but it can cause a lot of stress before it's thrown out." My mouth went dry. "You mean they could fake documents?" She gave a small nod. "It's rare, but I've seen it happen. That's why you need to keep everything safe, every text, every note, every voicemail. Build a record. If they cross the line, we'll use it." I gathered my papers back into the folder, my hands trembling slightly. I thought having the law on my side would make me feel safe, but it only underscored how far my family might go to strip me of what I'd earned. When I stepped outside, the sea air hit me like a slap. The waves pounded against the shore, violent and relentless white foam spraying high into the air. I leaned on the railing, staring at the horizon. The gulls screamed overhead. The cold wind tangled in my hair. I could almost hear my father's voice carried on the wind. "Don't be selfish. Think of your brother's children." I clenched the folder tighter against my chest. This wasn't selfishness. This was survival. For the first time, I realized something. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending my life, my right to exist on my own terms. And storms, no matter how brutal, can be weathered. I turned away from the sea, pulled my coat tighter, and walked back toward my home, the one place I swore I wouldn't surrender. Not to them, not ever. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of dread. I'd wake up every morning with my stomach already knotted, my ears straining for the sound of footsteps outside my door. My phone became a weapon turned against me. Every buzz, every ring, every vibration made my skin prickle with anxiety. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself they would get tired eventually. Families fight, families forgive, right? That's what I used to believe, but this wasn't a fight, it was a siege. On Wednesday, I came home from work and found Daniel's car parked across the street. He leaned against the hood, arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face like he was waiting for a prize. My stomach dropped. I gripped my keys so tightly they dug crescents into my palm. "Evening, sis," he called as I stepped out of the cab. "Got those keys for me yet?" I didn't answer. I walked straight toward the door, my legs stiff. He chuckled. "You're really going to drag this out? You think you can win? You know Mom and Dad are on my side. It's 3 against 1. You'll give in, you always do." I stopped on the steps, my back to him. I wanted to turn around, to scream, to tell him to get the hell away from my home. But my throat tightened and the words stuck. Instead, I shoved the key into the lock and slammed the door behind me. Inside, I leaned against the wood, heart pounding in my ears. His words echoed through the quiet house. "You'll give in, you always do. Not this time," I thought, "not this time." I grabbed my phone, hit record, and whispered to myself. Wednesday. Daniel was outside my house, threatening me. He asked for the keys again. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. From then on, I started documenting everything. Every call, every message, every knock on the door. I saved the voicemails, screenshotted the texts, even the lasagna note. My laptop folder began to fill with files named by date: harassment 0314, threat 0315. It felt obsessive, but Helen's warning about forged documents haunted me. If my family wanted a war, then I would build my arsenal. Still, paranoia crept in at night. I'd lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering if they might try to break in. I stacked chairs under the doorknob, tested the locks 3 times, even set a broomstick across the back window as if that could hold them off. But fear doesn't vanish with barricades. Fear seeps through the cracks. On Friday night, I woke to the sound of knocking, not the polite kind. Hard, sharp, insistent bangs that rattled the wood. My heart lurched into my throat. "Kyla," my mother's voice cut through the door, high and shrill. "You're hurting the family. Open up and talk to us." Behind her, my father's baritone boomed. "We're not leaving until you do what's right." I stood frozen in the living room, clutching my phone. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. The shadows in the hallway seemed to crowd closer, suffocating me. Then came Daniel, his tone mocking, cruel. "Sis, come on, don't make us wait out here all night. Give us the keys and we'll be gone." I hit record, holding the phone close. Their voices spilled into the file, undeniable proof, but that didn't calm me. I curled into the corner of the sofa, knees pulled to my chest, listening as they banged for what felt like an eternity. My neighbors must have heard. My entire street must have. But no one came. No one intervened. Finally, after what must have been 40 minutes, the pounding stopped. Silence fell heavy across the house. I waited another 10, 15 minutes before daring to peek out the window. Their car was gone. I let out a shaky breath and collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling. I had survived the night, but the walls of my sanctuary felt violated. This house was supposed to be safety, but now it echoed with the memory of fists and shouts. The next morning, I told Emma everything. She gasped so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "That's harassment, Kyla. Straight-up harassment. You need to call the police." "I don't know," I said, my voice thin. "What if they twist it? What if they make me look unstable?" Emma hesitated, then sighed. "Then you keep documenting. Every single detail. You build a case. Even if you don't go to the police yet, you'll have proof when you need it." Her words grounded me. Proof, that was my shield. That afternoon, I bought a cheap voice recorder from a shop near the pier. I slipped it into my coat pocket, pressing the button every time I left the house. I even left it running when I was home alone, just in case. It felt strange, living under constant surveillance of my own making. But it also felt like control, fragile but mine. And then, while unpacking another box in the attic storage of my townhouse, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected. A bundle of old papers my mother had packed years ago, left among my belongings, receipts, letters, a few photographs. And at the bottom, that same leather-bound notebook I'd seen days before, the one with her handwriting. This time, I read further. "Daniel's future must come first. Kyla will understand eventually. She's strong. She can manage without much. Sacrifices are expected of her." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. Sacrifices, expected, not asked, not considered, expected. I snapped the notebook shut, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to rip the pages out and scatter them into the sea, but instead, I tucked it into my growing folder of evidence. Because this wasn't just favoritism. This was a history, a pattern, proof that my family had always planned to strip me of what was mine. And if they wanted war, then war was what they'd get. The third week was when things escalated from noise to violence. It was a Thursday evening, gray and damp, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones. I had just finished a late freelance project and was ready to collapse onto the couch with a blanket and a cheap glass of wine. For once, the house felt peaceful. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the wooden floors, ordinary sounds that almost lulled me into believing I could live normally again. Then came the crash. A thunderous slam rattled the front door so hard the picture frames on the wall tilted. My heart shot into my throat. I froze, the wine glass trembling in my hand. Another bang, louder this time, followed by a man's voice, my father's, roaring through the wood. "Open up, Kyla, stop this nonsense." I set the glass down with shaking hands. The recorder in my pocket was already running, thank God. I tiptoed closer to the door, peering through the peephole. There they were, my parents, Daniel, and even Sarah, his wife, clutching their youngest child on her hip like some grotesque prop. Rain slicked their coats and the porch light illuminated their furious faces. "Daddy wants his house," Daniel sneered, his voice loud enough to wake the whole street. "Don't make us break the door down." My blood went cold. Break the door down. He wasn't bluffing. I saw the way his fists curled, the way his eyes burned. I grabbed my phone with clammy hands and dialed 999. My voice shook as I whispered into the receiver, "My family is outside my house. They're threatening me. Please send someone." The dispatcher's calm voice steadied me slightly, but my body still shook violently as I gave them my address. "Stay inside," she instructed. "Officers are on their way." The banging continued, relentless, as if they were trying to pound through my resolve. My mother's voice turned syrupy sweet, her tone dripping with manipulation. "Kyla, honey, don't be silly. We're only here to help you. You don't know what you're doing. Just let us in and we'll sort it all out." Her words sent me spiraling back to childhood, to nights when I'd cry in my bedroom and she'd appear at the door, voice honeyed, telling me to hush, to stop making a scene, to think of Daniel sleeping in the next room. She always dressed cruelty in sweetness, and I always obeyed. Not anymore. I backed away from the door, clutching the phone like a lifeline. My breath was shallow, ragged. Minutes crawled like hours until finally blue lights flashed against the curtains. The pounding stopped abruptly. Through the peephole, I watched my family scatter like startled animals. My father tried to argue with the officers when they approached, his voice booming, hands waving. Daniel shoved his fists into his pockets, jaw clenched. Sarah turned away, shielding her child. I stayed frozen until the knock came. This one was firm but professional. "Police, Miss Barton?" I unlocked the door with trembling fingers. 2 officers stood there, one male, one female, their reflective jackets gleaming in the rain. Relief flooded me, hot and dizzying. The female officer gave me a reassuring nod. "We received a call about harassment." "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. They keep coming here, threatening me. Tonight they said they'd break the door down." Behind her, I saw my father glaring at me from the curb, his face twisted in rage. My stomach lurched, but the officer's steady presence kept me rooted. "We've spoken to them," she said firmly. "They've been warned to leave. If they return, call us immediately. Do you want to press charges tonight?" The words stunned me. Press charges against my own family. My throat tightened. I don't know," I stammered. The male officer glanced at my shaking hands. "You don't have to decide right now. Just document everything. Save messages, notes, anything you have. If this continues, it'll build your case." I nodded quickly, clutching my phone against my chest like armor. When they finally left, the silence was deafening. I locked the door again, slid the chain into place, and pressed my back against the wood. My knees gave way and I sank onto the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I should have felt safe. I should have felt relieved. But instead, shame clawed at me. What kind of daughter calls the police on her parents? What kind of sister reports her brother? And yet, another voice inside me whispered. What kind of parents threaten to break their daughter's door down? What kind of brother tries to steal her home? I stayed curled there for a long time, the taste of salt and iron in my mouth from biting my lip too hard. Later, I transferred the recording from the night to my laptop. Their voices filled the room as I replayed the audio, my father's booming threats, my mother's manipulative cooing, Daniel's smug taunts. It chilled me to the bone, but it was also proof. Hard, undeniable proof. I saved the file under a new folder titled simply, Evidence. Every keystroke felt like a declaration of war. That night, I barely slept. I kept jolting awake, convinced I heard footsteps outside or whispers through the walls. At one point, I swore I saw a shadow move across the window, but when I checked, the street was empty. Fear was becoming a constant companion, but so was resolve. Because as much as their presence terrified me, something inside me was shifting. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just enduring, I was fighting back, and I knew this was only the beginning. After the police visit, I naively hoped things might quiet down. For a few days, my street was still, the house calm except for the ordinary hum of life. I tried to settle back into routine, coffee in the mornings, work deadlines piling up, the comfort of sketching logos late into the night. But peace in my family never lasted. It wasn't in their nature to retreat, it was in their blood to double down. The first sign came from a client. I was midway through presenting a design pitch over Zoom when she leaned closer to the screen and said casually, I heard you've been struggling. Everything okay at home? The question hit me like a slap. My smile faltered. I'm fine. Why? She hesitated, then said, it's just, word gets around. Brighton's small. People say you've been unstable. Something about police at your house? My stomach dropped. I ended the meeting as quickly as I could without seeming rude. When the call disconnected, I sat staring at my laptop, my skin clammy. Unstable. Police. Someone had been talking. I didn't need to guess who. That evening, Emma confirmed my worst fears. Kai, I don't know how to tell you this, but your brother, he's been spreading things, saying you had a breakdown, that you're paranoid, that you called the cops on your own parents because you imagined threats. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. He's trying to destroy me. He's trying to rewrite the story, Emma said grimly. Make it sound like you're the problem. The betrayal tasted bitter on my tongue. For years, Daniel had been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. Now he was twisting the narrative, painting me as the villain in my own story. And worse, people were listening. At the grocery store, I caught whispers as I walked past. A woman who'd once complimented my artwork now avoided my eyes. A neighbor across the street, usually friendly, nodded stiffly before retreating indoors. It was happening. My family's lies were seeping into the cracks of my life, poisoning everything I'd built. That night, the phone rang again. Against my better judgment, I picked up. My father's voice boomed through the line. Do you realize what you're doing to this family? Do you enjoy humiliating us? Everyone's talking, Kyla. You've made us a laughingstock. You should be ashamed. My hands shook as I held the phone. You're the ones showing up at my house in the middle of the night. You're the ones threatening me. I called the police because you left me no choice. You're sick, he spat. Twisted. Only a sick person calls the police on her own parents. You need help. I hung up before I could crumble. My whole body was trembling, my lungs struggling to pull in air. In the silence that followed, my phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel. Told you, sis. Everyone believes me. You'll hand the house over soon enough once nobody takes you seriously anymore. I threw the phone onto the couch, tears of rage blurring my vision. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was character assassination. The next morning, I marched back into Helen's office, slamming the folder of evidence onto her desk. She raised an eyebrow but listened as I poured everything out, the rumors, the whispers, the smear campaign. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse, she folded her hands calmly. This is defamation, slander. If you want, we can take action. It won't be easy, but the more evidence you gather, the stronger your case. Her calmness steadied me. For a moment, I imagined myself standing in a courtroom, Daniel squirming as recordings of his threats played for all to hear. My parents forced to listen to their own cruelty. But another part of me ached. Was I really ready to drag my family through the legal mud? That night, I opened my laptop and replayed the recordings, the banging on my door, my mother's sweet poison voice, Daniel's sneer. Each file felt like a stone added to the wall I was building between us. Halfway through listening, I heard a faint sound outside, footsteps crunching gravel. My chest tightened. I crept to the window, heart pounding. Daniel's car sat parked across the street again, his silhouette visible behind the wheel, unmoving, just watching. I pulled the curtains shut, my breath ragged. He was reminding me I wasn't safe, not even in my own home. Later, when I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, I dreamed of being locked in a glass box. My parents stood outside, tapping their fingers, whispering to Daniel, who held the key. I screamed for someone to hear me, but the glass was soundproof. No one came. I woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering. The war wasn't just outside my house anymore. It was inside my head. But as I sat in the dark, listening to the waves crash faintly in the distance, another thought grew louder than my fear. If they were willing to destroy my reputation, to steal my home, to break me apart piece by piece, then I had nothing left to lose. And people with nothing left to lose, they fight harder. The breaking point came on a stormy Saturday night. The wind howled against the townhouse, rattling the window panes, and rain lashed against the glass like 1,000 tiny fists. I had curled up on the sofa with a blanket, trying to lose myself in an old sketchbook, desperate for a moment of normalcy. The room smelled faintly of the chamomile tea steeping on the counter, and for once I thought maybe, just maybe, I could breathe. Then I heard it, the sound of metal scraping against the back door. My heart stuttered. I froze, every muscle locking tight. It came again, a deliberate, steady sound, the unmistakable grind of someone trying to force a lock. I moved silently to the kitchen, clutching my phone, my recorder already in my pocket. Through the small glass pane in the back door, I saw him, Daniel. His hood pulled up against the rain, shoulders hunched, hands working furiously with something shiny, a lockpick, or maybe just a screwdriver. Panic surged through me, hot and dizzying. I whispered into my recorder, my voice shaking, "Saturday, Daniel is at my back door trying to break in." The scraping grew louder, more insistent. I dialed 999 with trembling fingers, whispering urgently to the dispatcher. "Stay on the line," she told me. "Officers are on their way." But the sound of the lock snapping open cut through the storm before I could reply. The door swung inward, and Daniel stepped inside, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes glinting with fury. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice higher than I intended. He smirked, wiping water from his brow. "Taking back what's mine. You've dragged this out long enough." "This is my house," my voice cracked with panic. "Get out." He stepped closer, the mud from his shoes streaking across my kitchen floor. "Not for long. Mom and Dad have already sorted it. You're done, Kyla." Before I could demand what he meant, headlights cut through the storm outside. Blue lights reflected across the wet walls. Daniel cursed under his breath, spinning toward the door. The police burst in seconds later, their shouts filling the house. Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender, his grin infuriatingly calm. "She's overreacting," he told them smoothly. "I was just checking on her. She's been unstable, officers. We're worried about her. We even have paperwork to prove she can't handle this house on her own." I blinked, stunned. "What paperwork?" That was when my father appeared in the doorway, my mother clutching an umbrella behind him. My father held up a folded document in a plastic sleeve, his expression triumphant. "This," he declared, waving it like a trophy. "Kyla signed an agreement last year. She promised to let Daniel manage her assets if she ever bought property. We're only enforcing what she already agreed to." The room spun, my vision tunneled as I stepped closer. Through the clear sleeve I saw it, my name, my signature, sprawled across the bottom of the page. But it wasn't mine, my breath caught in my throat. "That's a forgery." My father's eyes narrowed. "Watch your words." "No," I snapped, my voice shaking with fury. "I never signed that, that's not even my handwriting." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them took the document, scanning it carefully. "Sir, if this is valid, it'll need to be verified in court." Daniel smirked, leaning casually against the counter. "Go ahead, you'll see." I felt the room close in on me, panic clawing at my chest. They had actually done it. They'd taken Helen's warning and turned it into reality. My own family had forged my name to steal everything from me, but fear quickly hardened into anger. "Check the slant of the letters," I snapped at the officer, my hands trembling. "I have dozens of old signatures on file, university forms, job contracts. I can prove this is fake." The female officer gave me a sharp nod, almost like encouragement. "We'll log this as evidence. Miss Barton, do you have access to samples we can compare it with?" "Yes," I said fiercely, my voice gaining strength. "At home, at work, I can show you right now." My father's jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The officers separated us, one pulling Daniel aside, the other speaking quietly to me. "You've done the right thing," she said gently. "Stay calm. If it's forged, the truth will come out." As they escorted my family back out into the storm, I stood in the wreckage of my kitchen, the floor wet with rain and mud, my hands still shaking. I should have been relieved. I should have felt safe knowing the police had intervened again. But instead, I felt gutted. They weren't just harassing me anymore. They weren't just spreading rumors. They had crossed the line into criminal territory. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood, my breath ragged. My mind reeled with images of the fake signature, the smug triumph in Daniel's eyes, the cold certainty in my father's voice. For years, I had been the quiet one, the compliant one, the one who didn't fight back. But as the storm raged outside and the echo of their threats lingered in the air, I made a silent vow. This time, I would fight. Not just for the house, not just for my freedom, but for the truth. Because if they were willing to forge my name, then I was willing to burn down every illusion of family we had left. The forged signature haunted me for days. Even after the police carried it away in a plastic evidence bag, the image of it burned in my mind, my name, stolen and twisted, a grotesque imitation of my own hand. I spent the next week in a blur of photocopies and file folders. My dining table disappeared beneath stacks of documents. University applications, old pay stubs, leases from flats I'd rented, contracts from freelance jobs. Each one bore my real signature, my handwriting in ink, messy in places, rushed in others, but mine. Authentic. I scanned them all into my laptop, labeling each file meticulously. Signature 2014, signature 2016, contract 2019. When I was done, I had a digital archive so thick it could drown any forgery. "This is good," Helen told me during our next meeting. She flipped through the binder I'd compiled, nodding approvingly. The more samples you have, the harder it is for them to claim legitimacy. Quartz-like patterns. Yours is consistent. Theirs is. Her confidence soothed me, but only for a moment. Because the war wasn't just in documents. It was in whispers, in looks, in the corrosive way my family's lies seeped into the world outside. I felt it every time I walked into a shop and someone's eyes lingered too long. I felt it when neighbors' curtains twitched as I took out the rubbish. Even at work, I noticed colleagues exchanging glances, their voices dropping when I passed. The smear campaign was working. One evening, desperate for comfort, I called Emma. She came over with a bottle of wine and 2 bags of takeaway curry, her arms full, her smile forced. "You look exhausted," she said as she set the food on the counter. "When was the last time you slept properly?" "Does it matter?" I muttered, tugging at the sleeve of my sweater. "They forged my signature, Em. They actually tried to make it legal. Who does that to their own daughter?" Emma poured us both glasses of wine, her movements brisk. "Families are complicated." I shot her a sharp look. "Complicated? They broke into my house. They're trying to steal everything I've worked for. That's not complicated. That's evil." Her eyes darted away, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw something flicker across her face, guilt, unease. It vanished before I could be sure. She reached for the notebook I'd left on the counter, the one filled with my notes, dates, and transcriptions of the recordings. "You've been writing everything down?" she asked lightly, flipping through a page. I snatched it back, my pulse spiking. "Of course I have to, it's my record." Emma raised her hands in surrender, laughing nervously. "I was just curious, relax." But I couldn't relax. The tension coiled in my stomach wouldn't let me. Why did she want to see my notes? Why did her tone sound more curious than supportive? I shoved the notebook into a drawer, forcing a smile to mask my suspicion. "Thanks for coming over," I said quickly, trying to steer the evening back to normal. We ate in near silence, the curry cooling faster than usual. Emma filled the quiet with small talk about work, about a holiday she wanted to take, about how stressful life was these days. I nodded, but my mind churned. Later, when she left, I stood at the window and watched her walk down the street, her coat pulled tight against the chill. She paused briefly near the corner, pulling out her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. She typed quickly, glancing back at my house before turning away. The unease in my chest deepened. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. Emma had been my rock for years, the person I turned to when everything else crumbled. But hadn't I once thought the same of my parents? Of Daniel? Trust was dangerous. Trust had got me here. I shut the curtains, heart pounding. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. She was my friend. She had no reason to betray me. And yet, the next morning I received a text from my mother. "We know about your recordings. Destroy them before you embarrass yourself further. You don't want the world hearing your breakdowns." My blood ran cold. How did she know? Only Emma had been in my house. Only Emma had seen the notebook. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, my heart slamming against my ribs. 1,000 thoughts collided in my mind. Anger, confusion, denial. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were bluffing. Maybe Emma hadn't said anything. But doubt had been planted, and it was spreading like poison. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the piles of evidence, the recordings lined up neatly on my computer. My fortress, my truth. If Emma had betrayed me, I had no one left. The realization was sharp, painful, but also strangely liberating. If I couldn't trust anyone, then I would have to rely entirely on myself. No more leaning, no more hoping someone else would save me. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to write. Every memory, every slight. Every moment my family had chosen Daniel over me. I poured it all out, page after page, until the words blurred with tears. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was my story, my testimony. And someday soon the world would hear it, not through my family's lies, not through whispers in Brighton, but from me. Because if they thought they could rewrite my life, they had underestimated the wrong woman. The unease about Emma gnawed at me for days, like a splinter buried too deep to ignore. I tried to push it away, to remind myself of every kind thing she'd ever done, late-night talks in our university dorms, the way she once held my hand through a panic attack, the countless times she showed up with takeaway when I was too tired to cook. But the message from my mother about my recordings wouldn't stop echoing. The words looped through my head at night, louder than the wind outside. "We know about your recordings." They couldn't have known unless someone told them. And the only person who'd seen the notebook was Emma. Still, I wanted to believe. God, I wanted to believe. One Friday evening, she came over again. This time, I didn't invite her. She just showed up, knocking lightly on the door, holding a bottle of wine and a box of chocolates. "Thought you could use some cheering up," she said, her smile a little too bright, her eyes darting past me into the house. Something in my gut twisted, but I forced a smile and let her in. The living room was cluttered with papers, my fortress of evidence spread across the table. I quickly gathered them into a pile, but I saw her eyes flick over the stack with interest. We sat on the sofa, the bottle of wine open between us. Emma talked easily, too easily, about nothing, the weather, her colleagues, a TV show she'd started watching. I nodded, sipping from my glass, but my mind was elsewhere. Halfway through the evening, she excused herself to the bathroom. I waited until I heard the door click shut before quietly slipping into the hallway. My instincts screamed. Her voice carried through the thin walls. "She's cracking. Yes, I saw the files. She's keeping everything. Don't worry, I'll get more, just give me time." The world tilted. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stop the sound that threatened to escape. My best friend, my only friend, talking to them, feeding them. I stumbled back into the living room, my chest heaving. My heart pounded so loudly I almost didn't hear the bathroom door open again. Emma walked in, her expression carefully neutral as if nothing had happened. But I saw her phone tucked half hidden in her hand. I forced myself to sit calmly, though my insides were burning. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice tight. She smiled, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Fine. Why?" I wanted to scream, to grab the phone and smash it against the wall, to demand she explain how she could betray me after all these years. But instead, I swallowed the rage and nodded, because now I knew, and now I had to be smart. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk. I laughed when I was supposed to, asked questions I didn't care about, pretended I didn't notice how often she glanced at the drawer where my notebook was hidden. When she finally left, I stood at the window again, watching her retreat down the street. This time, I didn't just feel suspicion, I felt certainty. She was working with them. I spent the night tearing apart my house. I moved the recordings from my laptop to an encrypted drive, locked my paper evidence into a metal box I bought the next morning. I checked every window, every lock, convinced Emma might return in the night to steal what I had. And then I sat down and let myself grieve, because losing a friend can hurt more than losing a family. Friends are chosen. Friends are supposed to be safe, but Emma had chosen them. By Monday, I confronted Helen with the truth. I told her I suspected Emma of leaking my private notes, of reporting back to my parents. Helen listened, her expression unreadable. "Do you have proof?" she asked finally. I shook my head. "Just overheard her talking in the bathroom, but it was enough." Helen leaned forward. "Then treat her as compromised. Don't share anything further. Keep your evidence locked down. And Kyla, this might actually strengthen your case. If they're so desperate they're planting spies in your life, it shows intent. Malice. A pattern." Her words steadied me, but the hollow ache inside remained. That night my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Emma says you're cracking. Soon you'll realize you can't win, just give up now." My hands shook as I read it, bile rising in my throat. For the first time in weeks I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I smiled. Because now I had proof. If they were stupid enough to text me that, then they had tied Emma directly to their scheme. I took a screenshot, filed it under evidence, and closed my laptop with steady hands. The ache of betrayal still throbbed in my chest, but beneath it something stronger pulsed, resolve. My family thought they had broken me. Emma thought she could outsmart me, but they had only made me sharper. And this time I wasn't just playing defense. This time I was going on the attack. The night I discovered Emma's betrayal, something inside me shifted. Grief was still there, raw, jagged, but beneath it another force had started to take shape. Anger, not the frantic, helpless anger that left me trembling in bed. This was sharper, colder, purposeful. They thought they could isolate me, first by slandering me in Brighton, then by making me doubt my own sanity, then by taking away my one ally. But they hadn't realized something vital. When you strip someone of everything, what's left is a person with nothing to lose, and I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank page. My hands hovered over the keys, hesitating for only a moment before I began to type. My name is Kyla Barton. I am 27 years old, and this is how my own family tried to steal my home. Once I started, I couldn't stop. The words poured out like a flood. Every manipulation, every slammed door, every cruel remark buried under years of silence. I described the dinner where they revealed the family plan, the lasagna left in my fridge like a poison gift, the threats outside my door, the forged signature. I included screenshots of texts, recordings of voices, even a blurred copy of the forged document itself. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking, my face wet with tears I hadn't realized had fallen. But my story was there, on the screen. Undeniable. I posted it, not just to my private circle, but to the world. At first, nothing happened. A few likes, a few comments, a couple of shares. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Then, like a spark catching dry grass, it spread. By evening, hundreds of people had shared it. By midnight, thousands. Strangers from all over were commenting, sending me messages of support, telling me their own stories of family betrayal, of inheritance wars, of golden children and scapegoats. My inbox overflowed with kindness, with validation, with rage on my behalf. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone, but not everyone was kind. My brother's friends flooded the comments with accusations. She's lying, she's crazy, don't believe her. My parents tried to post rebuttals, painting themselves as the victims of an ungrateful daughter. But the screenshots, the recordings, they were too strong. People didn't buy it. One comment stuck with me. A woman I'd never met wrote, "Families like yours think they can silence us. You're braver than you know, keep fighting." I read it over and over until the words sank deep into my bones. Of course, my family didn't take it quietly. The next day, my phone lit up with messages more vicious than ever. "Mom, how could you shame us like this? Do you realize what you've done? Everyone in town knows." "Dad, delete it now. You're humiliating your family. This will ruin us." "Daniel, you think the internet will save you? It won't. You're still weak, and I'll still win." I laughed, actually laughed. For the first time in weeks, their fury didn't pierce me. It only fueled me. Because this time, they weren't controlling the story. I was. The pressure on them grew quickly. Neighbors who once whispered behind curtains now crossed the street to avoid them. My father's golf buddies stopped returning his calls. Even Sarah's friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with such ugliness. And then, the local paper picked it up. A journalist emailed me, asking if I'd be willing to speak on record. I hesitated, my stomach knotting at the thought of my face in print, but then I thought of that forged signature, of Daniel standing in my kitchen with mud on his shoes, grinning like a predator. "Yes," I replied. "I'll talk." The article ran the following week. Brighton woman accuses family of harassment and forgery in battle over home. My photo sat at the top, my words quoted beneath. The effect was immediate. More messages poured in, this time from lawyers offering pro bono advice, from advocacy groups, from people who had been silenced in their own families and finally saw themselves in mine. But the best part? Silence from my family. For days, nothing. No calls, no knocks, no notes. Just a heavy, furious silence. I knew what that meant. They were regrouping, plotting their next move. One night, as I sat in the glow of my computer, I received a new message from an anonymous account. Just 3 words, "You will pay." My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I took a screenshot, saved it to my evidence folder, and whispered into the quiet house, "Not if you pay first." Because now the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about justice, and I was ready to see it through to the end. The silence didn't last. By the second week after the article, a thick envelope arrived at my door. The official seal stamped across it made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Inside were neatly typed words, black ink on cream paper, the kind of language that sounds calm but feels like a blade pressed to your throat. Notice of civil action. My parents and Daniel were suing me. According to the claim, I had promised, verbally and in writing, to allow Daniel to manage any property I purchased. They attached the forged agreement as evidence. They alleged I was mentally unstable, incapable of handling financial responsibility. They demanded the court transfer management of my home to Daniel for the good of the family. I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread before me, my hands trembling. It wasn't a surprise, not really. I'd been bracing for this, but seeing it in black and white, stamped and signed by a court clerk, it felt like being shoved underwater with no way to surface. I called Helen immediately. She came to my house that evening, her expression grim but resolute. "They've escalated," she said, flipping through the pages. "This is exactly what I warned you about. But listen, this isn't the end. It's only the beginning of the legal process. We'll fight this. You have evidence, you have the truth." Her calmness steadied me, but I could see the weight in her eyes. This wouldn't be easy. The weeks that followed were consumed by preparation. Court filings, witness statements, endless paperwork. I lived in a blur of legal jargon, deadlines, and constant dread. My once cozy townhouse looked more like a war room, papers and binders stacked in every corner. Meanwhile, my family struck at my weakest point, public opinion. They doubled down on their smear campaign, painting me as unstable, selfish, vindictive. Anonymous letters appeared in my mailbox, calling me a disgrace. Flyers with twisted versions of my story showed up on neighbors' doors. Someone even spray-painted "liar" across my front gate. I scrubbed the paint off with trembling hands, tears streaking my face until Emma's voice echoed in my head, "She's cracking." But I didn't crack. Not this time. The day of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse in a black coat, clutching a folder so tightly my knuckles ached. Rain slicked the pavement, the air heavy with the smell of wet stone. Helen stood beside me, calm and steady, a quiet anchor against the storm. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. My family sat across the aisle, Daniel in a pressed suit that made him look respectable, my parents at his side, their expressions carefully composed into masks of hurt and disappointment. Sarah sat behind them, eyes downcast, playing the role of the supportive wife. I felt the weight of their stares pressing into me, but I forced myself to look straight ahead. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Their lawyer spoke first, painting me as an ungrateful daughter who had lashed out at her loving family. He held up the forged agreement, waving it like holy scripture. Miss Barton clearly intended for her brother to manage her affairs. Her recent erratic behavior only confirms her incapacity. I wanted to scream, to leap from my chair and tear the lies apart, but Helen placed a steadying hand on mine. "Wait," her touch said. "Our turn will come." When it did, she rose with quiet authority. "Your Honor, the defense will demonstrate that this so-called agreement is nothing more than a forgery, an attempt by the plaintiffs to steal my client's property. We have handwriting experts prepared to testify, as well as extensive samples of Miss Barton's authentic signature spanning over a decade." The judge nodded, unimpressed but attentive. Then came the moment that made my blood run cold. Emma walked into the courtroom. My heart seized. She was supposed to be my friend, my ally. Instead, she took a seat beside my family's lawyer, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When she was called to the stand, her voice was soft, rehearsed. Kyla confided in me that she felt overwhelmed. She said she sometimes doubted her own decisions. She asked me if Daniel might be better at managing the house. I only want what's best for her. Each word was a dagger, lies wrapped in just enough truth to sound believable. I stared at her, my chest burning. She avoided my eyes. Helen leaned toward me, whispering, "We'll tear this apart, stay calm." When it was my turn, I rose slowly, legs trembling but spine straight. I told the truth, every detail. The lasagna, the pounding on my door, the threats, the forged signature. I played recordings in the courtroom, the voices of my parents and brother echoing through the wood-paneled chamber. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Then I produced the text message, the one linking Emma directly to them. "Emma says you're cracking." For the first time, her mask slipped. Her cheeks flushed. She fumbled for words. Helen pounced, her voice sharp as glass. "Miss Sanders, care to explain why the plaintiffs would reference your name in direct connection to their harassment campaign? Were you acting as an informant for them while pretending to support my client?" Emma stammered, her voice cracking, but the damage was done. The judge's expression hardened, his pen scratching across the page. By the time the session ended, the tide had shifted. My family's lies hung heavy in the air, exposed by their own greed and desperation. As I walked out of the courtroom, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale, almost hopeful. For the first time, I felt it in my bones. They might have broken me once, but this time I was breaking free. The second day of the hearing felt like stepping into the eye of a storm. The courtroom was colder than the first, the air tight with anticipation. I sat at the defense table, my hands folded on top of the thick binder Helen had helped me prepare. Across the aisle, my family looked sharp, polished, respectable. But beneath the veneer, I saw the tension, the twitch in my father's jaw, the way Daniel clenched and unclenched his fists, my mother's trembling hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Emma wasn't there. She hadn't returned after the humiliation of the previous day. That, at least, was a small mercy. The judge entered, his robe swishing as he settled into his seat. His eyes were heavy with weariness, but when he looked at me, I thought I saw something, perhaps not sympathy, but recognition. He'd seen this before. Families tearing each other apart. Greed masquerading as love. The plaintiffs presented their final argument, insisting that my mental instability and irrational paranoia proved I wasn't fit to manage my own affairs. They pointed to my social media post, accusing me of defaming my family publicly, as though truth-telling was a crime. I sat silent, my jaw clenched, as their lawyer's voice droned on. Then Helen rose. She was calm, precise, devastating. Piece by piece, she dismantled their case. She presented the handwriting expert, who explained in detail how the forged agreement bore none of the unique characteristics of my signature. She displayed my decade-long archive of authentic documents. She replayed the recordings where my father barked threats, where Daniel demanded I surrender the house, where my mother admitted to leaving lasagna as a warning. Finally, she held up the text message, the one that tied Emma to their campaign. "This," Helen said firmly, "is not the behavior of a family concerned for their daughter's well-being. This is a conspiracy to strip a young woman of her property, her autonomy, and her dignity, and Miss Barton has endured enough." The words rang out like a verdict before the verdict. The judge sat in silence for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the room. My family sat stiffly, their masks cracking under the weight of evidence. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, authoritative. "The court finds the plaintiff's claims unsubstantiated and their evidence fraudulent. The property in question remains solely under the ownership of Miss Kyla Barton. Furthermore, this court recommends the matter of forgery be referred to the Crown Prosecution Service for further investigation." The gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. It was over. For a heartbeat, I didn't move. I barely breathed. Relief and disbelief collided in my chest until I thought I might collapse under the weight of it. Across the aisle, Daniel shot to his feet, his face mottled with rage. "This isn't over," he shouted, his voice cracking. Security moved in quickly, guiding him back, while my father sat pale and silent, staring straight ahead. My mother covered her face with trembling hands. I rose slowly, my knees unsteady, but my spine straighter than it had been in years. Helen squeezed my shoulder, her voice soft in my ear. "You did it!" As we stepped out of the courtroom, flashes exploded around us. Reporters shoved microphones forward, shouting questions. For once, I didn't flinch. I lifted my chin and walked through the chaos, the air cool and sharp against my skin. The courthouse steps felt like the top of a mountain. I stood there for a moment, looking out at the crowd gathered below, the sea of faces, some curious, some supportive, some skeptical. And I realized something. It didn't matter what they all thought. What mattered was that I had survived. That night, alone in my house, I sat on the sofa with the binder of evidence still resting on the table beside me. The rain tapped softly against the windows, gentle this time, almost like applause. I thought of Emma, of my parents, of Daniel. I thought of the years I'd spent begging for scraps of approval, for the illusion of family. And then I thought of the judge's voice, steady and sure. The property remains solely under the ownership of Miss Kyla Barton. For the first time in months, maybe years, I allowed myself to smile. The war wasn't fully over. There would be investigations, whispers, consequences, but the battle that mattered most, the one for my freedom, was won. And for the first time, the house didn't feel like a fortress under siege. It felt like home. The morning after the verdict, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that had haunted my house for months, but a gentler kind. The kind you notice after a storm, when the air feels washed clean. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the world outside, cars on the street, gulls crying over the sea, a neighbor's dog barking. Ordinary sounds, familiar sounds. Yet they felt new, like I was hearing them for the first time. For weeks, I had dreamed of this moment. I thought it would feel triumphant, explosive, like fireworks bursting in the night. Instead, it was quiet, almost fragile. I padded downstairs, bare feet on the cool wood floor. The kitchen still bore scars of the siege, scratches on the back door where Daniel had forced the lock, a faint stain on the tiles from the night the storm raged. But it was mine. The walls, the windows, the very air. Mine. I made coffee slowly, deliberately, savoring the ritual. The hiss of the kettle, the rich aroma filling the room. For once, there was no note taped to the door, no shadow lurking outside. Just me, the house, and the morning light pouring through the curtains. But victory had its own weight. I checked my phone, bracing for messages. There were plenty strangers sending congratulations, old acquaintances from school saying they were so proud of me, journalists asking for follow-ups. My inbox was a flood of attention, and part of me felt dizzy under it. Yet not a word from my family, no apology, no acknowledgement, only silence. I'd won, but I'd also lost something permanent. Emma, too, was gone. Her betrayal still stung, like pressing on a bruise that hadn't healed. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for my phone, wanting to send her a meme, a link, a thought, and then remembering. The line was cut. I sipped my coffee at the kitchen table, staring at the binder of evidence still sitting there. It looked almost absurd now, this heavy book of my own life catalogued like a crime scene. But it was more than paper. It was proof that I hadn't imagined it, proof that I had endured, and maybe proof that I could start over. Later that day, I walked down to the pier. The air was brisk, the sea restless but calmer than it had been in weeks. Children chased pigeons, tourists bought fish and chips, and for a moment I almost felt like just another face in the crowd. But people recognized me. A woman in a red coat touched my arm gently. "You're Kyla, aren't you, the one who stood up to her family?" I nodded, uncertain. She smiled, her eyes kind. "Thank you for speaking out, for showing the rest of us we're not alone." Her words stayed with me all the way home. Because that was the strange thing about truth. Once you spoke it, it didn't just belong to you anymore. It echoed, it connected, it gave others courage. That night I sat at my desk and opened a fresh document. Not evidence this time, not notes for lawyers, just words. I began to write about what I'd learned, about boundaries, about the illusion of loyalty, about how sometimes the people you're told to trust most are the ones who harm you deepest, and about how survival isn't just enduring, it's reclaiming. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as though they'd been waiting all along. This wasn't testimony for a judge, it was something else. A way to shape the chaos into meaning. A way to remind myself that I wasn't just the girl who fought her family in court. I was more than that. As I closed the laptop hours later, the house quiet around me, I felt it again, that silence. Gentle, fragile, but alive. The beginning of peace. The days after the verdict blurred into one another, but unlike before, the blur wasn't filled with dread. It was filled with space. Empty, unfamiliar, but no longer suffocating. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. There were no sudden knocks on the door, no notes taped to the glass, no phone buzzing with veiled threats. At first, the quiet unnerved me. I kept expecting something to happen, a shadow at the window, a voice shouting my name. But nothing came. And slowly, I began to realize that nothing could be beautiful. I started small. I painted the back door where Daniel had forced his way in, smoothing the scars until they were just another layer of history. I bought a new rug to cover the faint stain on the kitchen tiles. I planted flowers in the garden, watching as color returned to soil that had felt lifeless for too long. Each act felt symbolic, like reclaiming another piece of myself. The neighbors, too, seemed to change. A woman 2 doors down who had once avoided me stopped me on the street with a shy smile. "I read your story," she said softly. "You were brave." Another neighbor offered to help fix the lock on my shed. A man at the cafe paid for my coffee one morning, nodding silently before walking away. It startled me at first. I wasn't used to kindness without strings. But little by little, I let myself accept it. One evening, I was invited to speak at a community group in town. "Just share your experience," the organizer said. "People need to hear stories like yours." My first instinct was to refuse. The thought of standing in front of strangers, bearing my scars, made my chest tight. But then I remembered the woman in the red coat on the pier. "You showed the rest of us we're not alone." So I agreed. The night of the meeting, my palms sweated as I stood at the front of the small hall, rows of faces watching me expectantly. My voice shook at first, but once I started speaking, the words poured out. Not the legal jargon, not the evidence binder, just the truth. The fear, the betrayal, the moment I decided to fight back. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon, the whole hall was applauding. Afterward, people came up to me one by one. A young man whose brother had stolen his inheritance. A mother cut off by her daughter. A woman who whispered that her parents had always treated her like she didn't matter. Each story different, yet achingly familiar. In their eyes, I saw pieces of myself. Walking home that night, the air cool against my face, I realized something important. Survival was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of something else, something bigger. I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming my voice. And with it, perhaps, I could help others reclaim theirs too. Spring came to Brighton slowly, shy at first, then all at once. The gray skies softened, blossoms dotted the trees, and gulls wheeled lazily above the sea. My garden bloomed in colors I hadn't seen in years, reds, yellows, violets, proof that life could return even after the harshest winter. One evening, I sat on the front steps of my house, a mug of tea warming my hands, and watched the sun dip into the horizon. For so long, this place had been a battlefield. Now it was simply home. Mine. It struck me how far I had come. A year ago, I would have laughed if someone told me I could face down my entire family in court and win. Back then, I was the quiet daughter, the overlooked sister, the one too easy to dismiss. But somewhere between the lasagna in my fridge, the forged papers, and Emma's betrayal, I had found something I never knew I had, my own strength. And strength, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the act of standing your ground when everything around you tries to shove you back. I thought of others still trapped in their own wars, people afraid to speak, afraid to lose love that was never real to begin with. To them, I wanted to say, family is not defined by blood alone. It's defined by respect, by kindness, by choice. If your family cannot honor who you are, then it is not betrayal to protect yourself. It is survival. I had lost people I once thought I couldn't live without. But in their absence, I had discovered a greater truth. I could live without them. I could live without their approval, their lies, their control. And in doing so, I had finally learned how to live with myself. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. What remained was clarity. As the last light faded over the rooftops, I whispered the words I had needed to hear years ago, when I still believed silence was safety. I am enough, and I am free. The house behind me creaked softly, its windows glowing with the warmth of lamps inside. For the first time, it felt less like walls holding back enemies and more like arms opening wide. Not a prison, not a fortress. A home, my home. And with that thought, I stood, breathed in the salt air, and stepped inside, not as the girl they tried to break, but as the woman who had chosen herself.